For nearly 2 months, the family of 84-year-old Nancy Guthrie has lived in a suspended animation of grief and terror, watching the investigation into her abduction from her Tucson home shift from a massive 400-person hunt to a dwindling task force. Today, the silence was finally broken as her daughter, Savannah Guthrie, sat down for an agonizingly raw interview, revealing haunting new details about the night her mother was taken. Details that paint a far more violent and calculated picture than authorities first suggested. From propped open doors to the chilling discovery that Nancy was taken in her pajamas without her life-saving medication. The stakes have never been higher. If you are new to the True Crime Report, subscribe now and hit the bell. We are tracking every forensic lead and investigative failure in the race to bring Nancy Guthrie home before the trail goes cold forever. The raw emotion in Savannah Guthrie's voice during her sit-down with Hoda Kotb wasn't just the sound of a daughter in mourning. It was the sound of a family desperate to re-energize a case that many fear is atrophying. Savannah's disclosure that Nancy was taken in the dead of night in her pajamas with no shoes and without her medicine is a gut punch to the wandering theory that Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos floated early on. Analysts suggest this specific detail is intended to recalibrate public perception. An 84-year-old woman with severe mobility issues who struggled to walk to her mailbox on a good day does not wander out of her house in bare feet across sharp desert stones at 3 a.m. This points directly toward a forced removal. If Nancy was barefoot, it suggests she was either carried or forced to walk under extreme duress. Criminologists note that taking a victim without their shoes or medication often indicates a perpetrator who is either disorganized and hurried or someone so indifferent to the victim's survival that they didn't care about the immediate medical consequences. For a woman with a pacemaker and chronic back pain, every hour without her regimen is a physical catastrophe. Savannah's emphasis on the pajamas and no shoes isn't just a sad detail. It is a forensic marker of the total lack of preparation Nancy had for leaving that home. It reinforces the nightmare scenario, a safe haven violated in the most intimate way possible. One of the most startling revelations from the Today Show interview involves the entry points of the Guthrie residence. Savannah referred to the back doors, plural, being propped open. This is a massive shift in the narrative. Previously, the focus was almost entirely on the front door, where the now infamous masked figure was captured on a Nest camera. However, original analysis of the property layout, aided by independent researchers like Gray Hughes, has identified a third perpendicular door leading into the kitchen that is virtually invisible from standard aerial shots. Investigators believe the use of the term propped open is critical. To prop a door suggests a deliberate mechanical action using an object to ensure the door does not latch shut. This indicates a level of premeditation. If the perpetrator propped the back doors, they were creating a guaranteed exit or entry route that wouldn't involve the noise of a turning handle or a clicking lock. Sources close to the case indicate that Nancy Guthrie may have had a habit of leaving these doors unlocked, a detail Savannah seemingly confirmed by mentioning the family's immediate realization that the doors being open didn't make any sense in the context of a medical emergency. If a predator was scouting the neighborhood, they may have identified this lapse in security weeks in advance. It suggests this wasn't a random hit, but a targeted exploitation of a vulnerable woman's daily routine. The mystery of the front door camera has only deepened with Savannah's interview. She explicitly stated that the camera had been yanked off its mount. This matches earlier reports of glass fragments found on the doorstep, but it contradicts the idea of a simple smash. If the perpetrator used a vine or some sort of leverage to pry the device from the wall, it shows a level of forensic awareness. They didn't just want to stop the recording. They wanted to take the evidence with them. Yet they did this after allowing themselves to be filmed in a bizarre, almost theatrical costume. This brings us to the most divisive theory in this case, the staging hypothesis. Former FBI agents note that the perpetrator's behavior on the porch, holding weeds, wearing a mask that looked like something out of a movie, and posing for the lens feels like misdirection. If the primary goal was a quiet abduction, why perform for the camera? One theory being explored is that the perpetrator wanted to create a ransom narrative to hide a more personal motive. By yanking the camera, they might have been trying to hide the exit, specifically how Nancy was moved from the house to a vehicle. If they took her out the front, they were at their highest risk of being seen by neighbors. If they used the propped back doors, they could have utilized the shadows of the side yard. Savannah's heartbreak is compounded by this tactical confusion, the feeling that they are being toyed with by an offender who knows exactly how to manipulate the media and the police. The specter of the ransom letters has returned to the forefront, and Savannah's perspective on them is deeply unsettling. While the public and many media outlets had largely dismissed the erratic, sometimes incoherent demands sent to TMZ and local stations as the work of opportunistic bottom feeders, Savannah revealed a different internal belief. She noted that while most were likely fake, she believes two specific notes the family responded to were real. This is a significant pivot. If the family, and by extension the FBI, believes two notes were legitimate, it means there was a window of communication that has since slammed shut. Legal analysts point out that a ransom seeker who stops communicating without receiving a payout usually signals one of three things. The victim is no longer a viable asset, the perpetrator has been spooked by the massive media heat, or the entire ransom was a ruse to buy time for a disposal. The proof of life that Savannah and her siblings begged for never came. This silence is the most deafening part of the 54-day timeline. If those notes were real, as Savannah suspects, it implies the kidnapper had a specific financial motive tied to her high-profile career. The guilt she expressed, wondering if her mother's bed was targeted because of her own success, is a psychological burden no family should carry. Yet it remains a central pillar of the investigative theory. One of the most critical forensic developments we've tracked involves the blood found at the Guthrie residence. New information from sources close to the investigation indicates that the blood pattern wasn't just on the exterior tiles and the walkway. It was mirrored directly inside the threshold. Specifically, blood droplets were found in the foyer, the immediate entrance of the home, and nowhere else inside. This detail is highly informative for blood spatter experts like Paul Holes. If the blood starts in the foyer and moves out the front door, it suggests a violent encounter occurred the moment Nancy was moved toward the exit, or perhaps even a struggle at the door itself. Forensic analysts suggest this, quote, localized blood pattern is a major clue. If there was no blood in the bedroom, it implies Nancy was either not physically harmed in her bed or the injury was internal until she reached the door. However, if she was, quote, yanked or forced out, a blunt force injury like a strike to the head or a fall against the door frame could have caused immediate, quote, dripping patterns. The fact that the blood is concentrated at the threshold supports the theory that the front door was the primary extraction point. But it also raises a terrifying question. Why was there a struggle at the door if the back doors were already propped open? It suggests a possible change in the perpetrator's plan or a moment of resistance from Nancy that the offender hadn't anticipated. As the investigation enters its 8th week, the, quote, atrophy of the case is becoming a grim reality. Former FBI agents note that high-stakes cases like this typically follow a, quote, drawdown metric. In the beginning, 400 investigators were assigned to the Guthrie disappearance. Now, reports indicate the task force has shrunk to a dozen or fewer, primarily comprised of Pima County Sheriff's deputies and a small team at the FBI's Tucson field office. The Phoenix-based agents, the heavy hitters, have largely returned to their home base. This isn't necessarily a sign that the police have, quote, given up, but it is a sign that the initial scorched earth search of the neighborhood and digital records has been completed. The transition from a hot case to a cold case is a process of resource reallocation. Taxpayer dollars and man hours are shifted back to active public safety threats. For the Guthrie family, this move is excruciating. It means the duck theory, where investigators are paddling furiously beneath the surface while looking calm above, is being tested. While some believe the police are secretly closing in on a suspect through digital forensics or genetic genealogy, others are less optimistic. When an investigator is quoted as saying, "We ain't got," it reflects the profound frustration of a team that has hit a wall. In a whodunit case where the offender has successfully masked their identity and moved the victim, the lack of a smoking gun after 54 days puts the entire investigation at risk of stalling indefinitely. The behavior of Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos has become a secondary crisis within the primary investigation. While Savannah Guthrie spoke of tireless work, the internal reality of the sheriff's department is far more chaotic. A unanimous vote of no confidence from the deputies union, combined with a growing recall effort, paints a picture of a leader under siege. Allegations that Nanos failed to disclose a history of suspensions and use of force issues from his early days in El Paso and potentially lied about them in a deposition have shattered his credibility with both his staff and the public. Criminologists point out that a micromanaging leader in a high-profile case often creates a bottleneck for information. If the deputies on the ground don't trust their sheriff, the flow of intelligence between the street level and the decision makers breaks down. The fact that the sheriff initially pushed back on the significance of the January 11th recon mission, only to later admit it was a key date, suggests a disconnect. In a case where every hour matters, these political distractions and administrative failures are more than just inside baseball. They are potential obstacles to finding Nancy Guthrie. If the leadership is fractured, the perpetrator is the only one who benefits from the confusion. The timeline of this disappearance has always felt like a puzzle with missing pieces, but the January 11th detail is perhaps the most haunting. Savannah Guthrie's recent public statement specifically referenced this date, 3 weeks before the actual abduction. According to available reports, the FBI has been canvassing neighbors specifically about what they saw on that mid-January weekend. Original analysis suggests this wasn't just a random night, it was a recon mission. If the masked figure captured on the February 1st footage was the same individual seen scouting on the 11th, we are looking at a predator who hunted Nancy Guthrie with predatory patience. Experts in criminal profiling note that pre-offense behavior like this is a hallmark of a sophisticated offender. They don't just show up, they learn the rhythm of the house. They learn when the lights go out, when the neighbors are asleep, and most crucially, which doors are left unlocked. If the perpetrator was on that porch 21 days prior, they were testing the security. They were seeing if that Nest camera triggered a floodlight or an audible alarm. The fact that they returned on February 1st in full costume suggests they had already cleared the technical hurdles and were now focused on the psychological theater of the crime. This was a long game abduction, not a crime of opportunity. The Mexico connection is a theory that refuses to die, despite early dismissals by the Pima County Sheriff's Department. Investigators believe the proximity of Tucson to the border, less than 70 miles, makes it a logistical reality that cannot be ignored. While authorities initially stated there was no reason to believe Nancy was taken across the border, they have never provided the evidence to support that certainty. If the perpetrator used a stolen vehicle, as some analysts suggest, a 2-hour window is all they would need to vanish into the high-traffic border crossings of Nogales or Sassabee. One theory being explored by former federal agents is that the, quote, ransom was a distraction specifically designed to keep local police looking at digital trails while the physical evidence, Nancy herself, was being moved out of the country. If the offender is a, quote, trans-border criminal, they would know that American jurisdiction ends at the line. Savannah Guthrie noted that when she traveled to Mexico early in the search, almost no one had heard of her or the case. This, quote, information vacuum is exactly what a kidnapper would rely on. If Nancy is being held in a non-extradition environment, the, quote, tireless work of the FBI becomes a diplomatic nightmare rather than a standard criminal pursuit. The human cost of this 54-day saga reached a breaking point during Savannah's interview when she addressed the cruel speculation surrounding her own family. In high-profile abductions, the inner circle is always the first to be scrutinized. It is standard investigative procedure. However, the intensity of the whispers directed at Savannah's sister and brother-in-law has been, in her words, unbearable. Legal analysts point out that while the sheriff has technically cleared the family, the damage of trial by social media is often permanent. This is the emotional anchor of the story. The realization that while a mother is missing, a family is being dismantled from the inside out by public suspicion. Savannah's defense of her siblings, noting that her brother, a military intelligence veteran, saw the kidnapping for what it was immediately, highlights the internal strength they've had to muster. They aren't just fighting a kidnapper, they are fighting a narrative. Criminologists suggest that when the public focuses on family involvement without evidence, it actually aids the real perpetrator by providing them with a chaff of misinformation to hide behind. Every hour spent debunking a rumor about a family member is an hour not spent tracking the masked man on the porch. We have to talk about the stolen car theory, a lead that has gained significant traction among independent forensic analysts. If the perpetrator was intelligent enough to mask their face and yank a security camera, they were likely intelligent enough not to use a vehicle registered in their own name. Sources close to the case suggest that investigators are looking into unreported or briefly missing vehicles in the Tucson area from the night of January 31st. Imagine a scenario where a car is taken from a driveway at 2 a.m., used to transport Nancy Guthrie, and returned to its original spot by 5 a.m., with the owner none the wiser. Paul Holes, the man who caught the Golden State Killer, suggests that even a returned car would hold the key. New York's mobility issues and potential injuries mean she likely bled. On dark fabric, a bloodstain is invisible to the naked eye, but screams under a luminol light. The community in Tucson needs to look closer at their own driveways. Was your seat adjusted? Was there desert dirt on the floor mats you didn't recognize? Was the odometer a few miles higher than it should have been? In a case this cold, a borrowed car might be the only physical link left between that quiet Tucson street and the location where Nancy Guthrie was taken. The investigation has hit a wall that isn't just forensic, it's administrative. Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos, the man ostensibly leading the search for Nancy Guthrie, is now fighting for his professional life. A unanimous vote of no confidence from over 300 members of the Pima County Deputies Organization has sent shockwaves through the department. The primary cause? A resurfaced history of disciplinary actions from the sheriff's early career in El Paso. 8 separate suspensions involving illegal gambling and improper use of firearms that were reportedly never disclosed during his hiring in Arizona. Criminologists point out that when a department's rank and file explicitly call for their leader's resignation during an active, high-profile abduction, the internal damage is catastrophic. If the deputies on the ground don't trust their sheriff, the cohesion required for a massive FBI-led task force evaporates. A recall effort is now underway, requiring 120,000 signatures to trigger a special election. For the Guthrie family, this political firestorm is a terrifying distraction. Every minute the sheriff spends defending his 40-year-old employment records is a minute not spent reviewing the dwindling leads in Nancy's disappearance. It's a leadership crisis at the exact moment the investigation needs a steady hand. Despite the internal turmoil, forensic experts are still dissecting the few physical clues left behind, specifically the mirrored blood evidence. New reports confirm that the blood found on Nancy's front porch has been identified as hers, but sources close to the investigation have revealed a more troubling detail. matching blood droplets were found just inside the front foyer. Forensic science indicates that a person bleeding in the foyer and then on the porch suggests a continuous violent event at the exit of the home. Analysts suggest this, quote, threshold struggle is a key behavioral marker. If Nancy was bleeding inside the door, it implies she was injured before she ever crossed the porch. This contradicts the theory of a, quote, clean abduction, where a victim is simply escorted away. Instead, it points to a physical confrontation at the door. One theory being explored is that Nancy may have attempted to resist as she was being forced out of the house, resulting in a blunt force injury or a laceration. Because the blood was only found in the foyer and on the porch, and not in her bedroom, it indicates the violence was localized to the moment of extraction. The presence of her DNA in two distinct locations at the front of the house is the most concrete proof investigators have of a struggle. Yet it hasn't led them to a suspect's identity. In the second half of her heart-wrenching interview, Savannah Guthrie reached what can only be described as an emotional anchor, the moment of total spiritual vulnerability. She recounted a conversation with God in which she pleaded for the answer to the one question that has haunted her for 54 days. Where is she? Savannah described hearing a voice telling her, "You know where she is. She's with me." This profound religious experience highlights the shift in the family's processing of this nightmare. They are no longer just looking for a survivor. They are looking for peace. For the community in Tucson and the millions watching nationally, Savannah's words reflect the reality of ambiguous loss, the unique pain of not knowing if a loved one is alive or dead. Experts note that this stage of a case often sees a surge in long shot leads as the primary evidence dries up. The FBI has recently pivoted back to the neighborhood, specifically questioning residents about anyone who moved out shortly before the abduction or crews working on a home under construction nearby. They are looking for the invisible presence, the person who belonged in the neighborhood but had a reason to leave. This shift from physical evidence to behavioral canvassing is a sign that the traditional investigation has stalled, and the search for Nancy Guthrie has moved into the realm of cold case methodology. 7 weeks into a nightmare that has captivated and terrified the nation, the search for Nancy Guthrie stands at a perilous crossroads. From the raw spiritual revelations of Savannah Guthrie to the brewing political mutiny within the Pima County Sheriff's Department, the investigation has become a battle on multiple fronts. We have seen the haunting footage of a masked intruder, heard the agonizing details of a mother taken in her pajamas without her medicine, and tracked a blood trail that stops at the edge of a silent desert. This isn't just a news story. It is an urgent plea for the truth. Every detail we've covered, the propped open back doors, the recon mission on January 11th, and the missing front porch camera, is a piece of a puzzle that someone in Tucson holds the key to. If you found value in our deep dive analysis and investigative reporting, please share this video. The more eyes we have on these details, the harder it is for the truth to stay hidden. Hit the like button to help this reach a wider audience. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the True Crime Report. We won't stop tracking this case until there are answers. If you have any information, no matter how small, call 1-800-CALL-FBI. A family is waiting, a mother is missing, and the clock is still screaming. I'm Sandra. This is the True Crime Report. Thank you for watching.